On the 3rd of October 2023, our friend and comrade and very dear leftward author Prabir Purkayastha was arrested by the Delhi police on charges that are clearly trumped up. This conversation is not about those charges. This is about Prabir and his work, which has been in the public sphere for over 50 years now. He must be one of the few people who has the distinction of having been imprisoned by two authoritarian regimes half a century apart. He spent a year in jail during the emergency, and now it is 6 months since he's been in jail this time. To mark this 6-month anniversary of his incarceration, not a very happy anniversary, Vijay Prashad, my colleague and comrade at Leftward Books, and I are going to go through the books that Prabir and Leftward have made together over these years and try and see what makes Prabir, on the one side, a good citizen, and on the other side, so dangerous to the powers that be. We have called this conversation The Good Citizen because we believe that Prabir Purkayastha has done everything that a good citizen of a democratic, secular republic should do. He has engaged with the big ideas of his time. He has fought for and argued for and lobbied for the sovereignty and integrity of the country. He has sought to he has sought to help build a larger conversation around the scientific temper and to encourage that. He has fought for free software. He has fought for the rights of the Indian people in several fields, including secularism, workers' rights, farmers' rights, democratic rights in general, human rights, and so on and so forth. His role as the founder and editor-in-chief of Newsclick.in is something that is well known, and that's the primary reason why it appears to be the primary reason why he's in jail. But we wanted to focus on the other side of Prabir, which actually has engaged his entire life, one way or the other. So we are going to be talking about 5 books that Prabir Purkayastha and Leftward Books have made together. Vijay, the first of these books is this one here, Enron Blowout. This is a book that you and Prabir co-wrote in the sense that you wrote one part of the book and Prabir wrote another part of the book. Can you give us a sense of what was the context of this book and why this book was important at that time?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, Sudhanva, it's really important that we're having this conversation about Prabir's work because, in a way, he is being persecuted for the work that he has done over the course of, let's say, the past 55 years. I mean, since he was a very young man, he was active in enhancing India's democracy. I mean, isn't that really what Prabir has been working on? Improving the democratic institutions in India, inculcating rationality in Indian society, fighting for science and technology and sovereign science and technology. So India is not dependent on outside powers, for its technological wherewithal. I mean, just to go back to give context for this book, in the 1940s, before India won independence, there was already a debate and discussion within the Indian national movement about the importance of increasing the literacy of the population. When the British were thrown out of India, the literacy rate was just above 12%, the formal literacy rate. At the time, scientific education was thoroughly neglected in India. And so it became very important for the national movement, not just Nehru. There's a focus to do on Nehru, but it's really the broader national movement to build the infrastructure of science and technology. And it's out of that the higher education establishments were built, including the Indian Institutes of Technology, IITs, built across the country to enhance an understanding of science and technology, so that India itself could build the tools needed for a modern society, including the kind of engineers needed to build new kinds of mechanisms to electrify the country. And in fact, Prabir Purkayastha, after he finished his degree at one of these institutions, Jawaharlal Nehru University, from which he had been arrested during the emergency, became an engineer and spent his career while he was working with the Delhi Science Forum, while he was working with the popular science movements and so on. Prabir Purkayastha built a career as an engineer. I think people may not know that Prabir was an expert at electricity, at the very fabric of the thing that there was consensus around within Indian nationalism, right? One of the elements of consensus right after independence, there was a fight about what should education be. We at Leftward published a very good book by Veera Raghavan about the debate in Tamil Nadu over education policy. We know that in India, right after independence, there was a debate around language. What is a democratic language and so on. But there was a consensus over electricity. Whether you were Sardar Patel to the right or you were the communist to the left, everybody agreed that we needed electrification. I mean, you can't have a democratic society unless people can read and at night, and read the newspaper when they come back. You build a democratic society through that. So Prabir had a career in electricity. I mean, that's what he did for his own livelihood. At one strange moment in the 1990s, do I well remember this? We're sitting around, and there's this debate that India needs a liquefied natural gas plant in Maharashtra, which was going to be built by the Enron Corporation. And I remember at one level wanting to burst into giggles around this. Really, India needs to import liquefied natural gas at a time when we live in India within pipeline distance of the southern Fars field in Iran. You can just draw a pipeline from the southern Fars field in Iran across Pakistan into India. It was called the Peace Pipeline. But this Enron thing was on the table. And I remember Prabir saying, look, firstly, because he's an expert in electricity and energy, this makes no sense just in terms of the calculations. Like, it makes no sense. I, like you, don't know the first thing about how to calculate energy and so on. Prabir, the back of a napkin, effectively jotted down some points. And, in a sense, that was the genesis of Enron blowout, because it was easy for him to write the section on technology and on electricity grids and so on. And it was easy for me to write the story about how Enron was basically not even a company. It was a shell game. And effectively, they made money through accounting, through the company called Arthur Anderson. And that was our first book. But again, just to put it in context, remember, it was a signpost. And maybe interesting for you to tell the people here with us today about the importance of the signpost series for Leftward, and how Prabir and I did this, I don't know, in like 3 weeks or 4 weeks, we banged this thing out, because it was a signpost.
Well, Leftward Books began its journey of actually publishing books in the March of 1999. So, in fact, we've completed 25 years of publishing now already. And I remember in the very early days, the two things that were discussed a lot in Leftward One was this. One was a little bit of a crisis that we were facing in India as a whole, which is that the supply of books from the former Soviet Union had obviously dried up because the Soviet Union did not exist anymore, and so therefore there was a great deal of need and hunger amongst readers for classics of Marxism.
Mm,
And so the first book that we did publish, in fact, was called A World to Win: Essays on the Communist Manifesto, that came out in March 1999. And and the idea there was to really reintroduce the Marxist classics with contemporary introductions for Indian readers and also for global readers. But the other series that we started work on simultaneously was this series called Signpost, and it was called Signpost: Issues That Matter. And the first amongst those was done by Enron, who at that time was the editor of Frontline, and he did a signpost um, um, on India's nuclear tests that had taken place the previous year in 1998, on Pokhran 2, in a sense. Um, that was called Riding the Nuclear Tiger. And after that, we published Praveen Swami's book on the Kargil War. Then the third was a very important book by A.G. Noorani. It was called The RSS and the BJP, A Division of Labor. This is a book that has continued to sell to date. We still sell it, even though it's quite outdated in terms of its information, but not the essential analysis still holds. Then Signpost 4 was, of course, your own book, Vijay, which was called War Against the Planet, the Fifth Afghan War, Imperialism, and Other Assorted Fundamentalisms. And the fifth signpost was again Mr. Noorani, his book called Islam and Jihad. And after this, in November 2002, is when we published Enron Blowout: Corporate Capitalism and the Theft of the Global Commons. Now, this idea of the global commons is something that we'll return to later in the conversation, because this has been very much part of the larger arc of Probir's thinking and his activism as well, right? But you did mention the peace pipeline from Iran, and that was one of the casualties, if I'm not mistaken, of the Indo-US nuclear deal. And that is what was the subject of the second book that Probir did with us, which was signpost number 10 in the same series. It was called Uncle Sam's Nuclear Cabin. And this was a book that Prabir Purkayastha, Nainan Koshi, and M.K. Bhadrakumar, the three of them each wrote a chapter for this. Um, uh, each chapter is about 8-10,000 words, and this was really part of our understanding. By our understanding, I mean the left's understanding of why the Indo-US nuclear deal was antagonistic to India's interests, and why it compromised India's sovereignty. And so, could you speak a little bit about the nuclear deal and about what you remember of this book?
yeah, so I mean, it's really interesting that after um, the war that the U.S. prosecuted against Afghanistan, and then the war the U.S. prosecuted against Iraq, the illegal war. Both these wars, one of them got rid of the Taliban in Afghanistan, well, for 20 years, and then the other side got rid of Saddam Hussein's government. Well, in fact, these were two adversaries of Iran. So, I mean, I don't know what they were thinking in the US establishment, but they used US military force to get rid of Iran's two adversaries. That's what basically happened. And Iran then, was strengthened at that moment. United States government from nowhere suddenly came in and said that, hey, listen, we're going to have to suffocate Iran, put it back in its place. And they started this thing about Iran having nuclear weapons. Now, at the same time, it was very important to get India on the US side against Iran. So the United States began to talk to India and say that, look, we will go and be your guarantor at the nuclear suppliers group. We'll make sure you are able to get materials for your nuclear program. What you have to do is you have to vote against Iran at the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. It's a funny thing, India is not a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran is. India has tested nuclear weapons twice. Iran has never tested nuclear weapons. And yet, India was in a position, having a seat on the IAEA board at that time, the International Atomic Energy Agency, to vote to sanction Iran for a nuclear weapons program that Iran didn't have, but which India had. Okay, so the sweetener for this was that the US was going to provide India with nuclear materials. And India went ahead with this. This was the Indo-US nuclear deal. Very bad for the world, very bad for Indian foreign policy. Nainan Koshi is a distinguished person, academic, had written a book for us, you remember, which was effectively the history of Indian foreign policy. And very big, important book, which I still refer to every once in a while, pull it out of my shelf when I'm near my shelves and I have a glance at it. M.K. Bhadrakumar had a very distinguished career as an ambassador of India to a number of countries and had already by then become an important public commentator on matters of geopolitics, foreign policy, Indian foreign policy, in fact. Very smart and very knowledgeable person. So, I mean, it was important that we at Leftward enter the conversation and debate. And in fact, we did two signposts about the nuclear deal. One written by Prakash Karat, which was on the subordinate ally. That was a phrase that Prakash Karat had begun to use, that India was putting it in the position of being a subordinate ally to the United States. That was one signpost. And then the second, which was less, in a sense, political, right? Prakash's signpost was very political, saying we're kind of undermining Indian foreign policy or the space for India to have an independent foreign policy. And the second book was much more informative, with Nainan Koshi on foreign policy, Bhadra Kumar on the geopolitics, and once more, Prabir on, in a way, the science and tech of this deal. What does it mean? Like, even the idea that India could have a nuclear energy program was completely nonsensical, so expensive. Far better to have other options, including back on the table for us and for me. I think right till I die, I'm going to be talking about the fact that you just need to pull a pipeline from the South Fars field to India. Now, I understand it has to go through Baluchistan, which is a tense area for Pakistan. It has to come through Sindh and so on. The Pakistan-India relation has to improve before this pipeline can be established. Pakistan's own relationship with Baluchistan has to be improved. The Iranian relationship with the Baluch has to be improved. I mean, I know there are a lot of barriers, but it's still much more sensible. And this little signpost effectively made the argument. And I understand also, Sudhu, that for a lot of people, this was a very difficult argument to understand. Like, what's wrong with India having a relationship with the United States, the most powerful country at that time in the world? What's wrong with that? By the way, this attitude of what's wrong with that, why doesn't this apply to China? China is the world's largest economy. Why isn't there this sort of Daliddar attitude, like, what's wrong with having a relation? It's the biggest economy in the world. It's interesting, it doesn't, that same Daliddar kind of attitude doesn't function here. It was there though. You remember it. What's wrong? Hey, listen, what's wrong? That sort of attitude. And we tried to enter the discussion and say, wait a minute. Here's a book. Read this little book. It's not very long. It'll give you a sense of what's actually at stake. And I think Prabir, bringing his compelling understanding of science and technology, I think that's a key thing, right through all his books for us. You and I have edited all his books. That compelling understanding that he has of technology and science, I mean, I've often felt, Sudhu, maybe I've often felt with some books, I have one hand tied behind my back while I'm editing it. I'm at a disadvantage. Like, editing Veera Raghavan. I don't know the details of Tamil Nadu politics. I felt, oh my God, how am I going to edit it? One hand. Sometimes with Prabir's book, I feel like both my hands are tied behind my back, and because his depth of knowledge of both science and technology is so so impressive. And from very early on, from Enron blowout, Uncle Sam's cabin onward, I felt that that intelligence, and not only there's the experience that he brings to bear to all his books.
I should also say that at that time, when the whole issue of the nuclear deal was being discussed, especially on television, at that time it was still possible in a limited way to have discussions on television, when it was not simply a shouting match and an abusing match.
Yeah.
Um, I remember at that time that Prabir was one of the most articulate spokespeople, not an official spokesperson of the left, but I'm saying that amplifying the left position
Mhm.
in a way that was comprehensible to common people. Um, and that's one of the great qualities of Probir as an intellectual and as an activist. He has this ability to translate very complex ideas into uh, without losing the complexity of it, but to put it across in a way that is simple and is and it's something that you understand enough of to be able to grasp the enormity of what is being argued. You may not grasp each individual part of it, but you get the overall arc of the argument quite clear. I should say that I also remember how struck I used to be at that time watching Probir on TV. This is well before Newsclick was formed. And at that time, I used to be quite struck by how Probir had always this complete calm about him, no matter what question was thrown to him. You know, um, and most of the television anchors at that time were also pretty hostile to the left position on the nuclear deal, right? And to be able to feel that with complete calm and often with humor is also something that I remember being very struck by. Uh, then, for a number of years,
Wait, Sudhu, just to come in on that, because our brother Prabir Purkayastha was on TV a few days ago. He was shown walking in Patiala House down a corridor. He came through a door and down a corridor. And I must say, I was in tears watching him walk, because ramrod straight, absolutely distinguished walk, his arms going by his side. And you know, decades of memory came sweeping back to me of exactly as you say on television, ramrod straight, almost as if he had a military career, which he didn't. Almost as if he had a military career, shoulders, absolutely, one straight line, and that hint of a smile when a bad question is starting. I mean, I've sat across from him in the Newsclick studio for years, and I know that hint of a smile when he's ready to come in and just, tear you apart. Like, really? You really believe that? So I saw him glance at the police officer as he
yes,
walked down the corridor and
yes.
gave him that smile. And I thought, oh my God, as I said, decades of memory, body memory came flooding back watching that. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, no, you're absolutely right. I should also say that I watched that video many times, and like you, I was intensely moved by it. But I must also say that I'm sure it's no walk in the park for Probir as far as jail is concerned. He's 76 years old. He has health issues like everybody else. But I must say that Probir must be one of the bravest people I know. And there's no way that they can break his spirit. There's absolutely no way. There's no way that's going to happen. He will, and I hope that he gets a fair trial. I hope that he gets the opportunity to stand up in court and defend his ideas, which are ideas for the betterment of society, of the world, and of the Indian people. You know, and that's something that also animated another very dear comrade of ours, who we lost sadly way too early, and that is Dr. Amit Sen Gupta, Comrade Amit Sen Gupta. And Amit and Prabir were close friends and comrades. They worked together for many, many years, building from the ground up the people's science movement, the people's health movement. And when Amit passed in that very unfortunate, um, uh, swimming accident, we were really hoping for many, many more years of Amit's work. He was also a very formidable intellectual in his own right, and this is really Probir's, in a sense, his tribute uh, to his to one of his closest friends and comrades. It's called Political Journeys in Health, and the book is divided in two parts. One part of it is essays on Amit and his work, and the other part is essays and articles by Amit on people's health. And I think really, in one sense, this is really what makes people like Probir, Amit, um, and many other comrades of ours really what we are calling them, the good citizen. What is a citizen supposed to do in a republic? A citizen is supposed to stand up and make their voice heard. A citizen is supposed to put whatever expertise they have to the service of society for the betterment of the people, for the poor, for those uh, who've been marginalized through history. And to my mind, Amit and Probir both have been exemplary examples of this. So, could you share some of your reflections on Amit and his work, and Probir and Amit, you
Yeah.
know, their relationship?
So, though you well remember the old office of Delhi Science Forum. I mean, I remember going to that office where, seems to me, because I was this big old, physically big old fellow, that they had children's desks there. Because I remember sitting at a desk over the course of several months with Amit Sengupta, who had really one of the world's most ridiculous laughs because he would giggle. He had a most ridiculous form of laughing, and he laughed all the time. Um, he was a doctor who, was trained and could have worked at one of the big hospitals and made a lot of money and so on. But because he was also committed to the left, Dr. Amit Sengupta decided to become a doctor for the people. And doctor for the people in practice clinically, but really also a doctor for the people in terms of policy. He was seized long before the WTO was created. You know, the WTO is created in 1994. I remember sitting having this conversation, and I'm going to explain why, in something like 1990 at the Delhi Science Forum office with my knees banging literally against the table, tiny little chairs. I don't know, they must have got some middle school classroom equipment for free donated to them in that office. Uh, Amit was at the time, the late 80s and early 90s, working seriously on the question of the pharmaceutical companies and prices of medicines. Because a doctor for the people is also a doctor for the whole structure, not just the clinical, aspect of it, treating this or that patient, but fighting as a doctor on issues of access, medical access, and so on. And I remember Amit produced this book. I was helping him a little bit with the book. Big book. I think it was published by Orient Longman. Maybe you were the editor. Uh, but one of those houses published it. This is before Leftward, of course. Um, but what I remember is all the years, right from when Leftward started, that day it started in Rajendra Prasad Road with the red door and so on. I harassed Amit from the first day that Amit, we need a signpost from you on Indian medicine. Like what is the situation? We need a book by you on the situation of the medical establishment, blah, blah, blah. Harassed him and harassed him. But he was so busy with a range of things, including building the people's health movement globally, where he was an important leader of the people's health movement. I mean, what's interesting about the friendship of Prabir, who was this tall, and Amit, who was this tall, they had a very fascinating physical aspect to them, is that they both took the expertise, Probir's expertise in science and technology, later, from people's science movement, later to the free software movement as the digital landscape opened up. And Amit took his expertise to the people's health movement. Again, both of them highly trained, highly skilled people, but took their expertise into these people's movements. People's science movement for Prabir, people's health movement for Amit. And again, people's health movement now is a very big, important movement globally of doctors. And I must say that in this time of the genocidal attack in Gaza, people's health movement is, active in defending the doctors, nurses, and medical orderlies inside Gaza, many of whom have been killed. The Al Shifa Hospital, for instance, where recently there's been documented massacres. There have been members of the People's Health Movement involved in amongst the dead, and that was Amit's work. This is long before it became easy to be a global activist. Before email, for instance, Dr. Amit Sengupta was again. So Probir and Amit, they were like twins. So as you know, you and I joke that we are twins. Well, they were also twins, physically completely different, but twins nonetheless, um, of one mind. And I think the loss of Amit in that very tragic swimming accident, the loss of Amit hurt many people, but of course, Probir very much, to lose such a close person who understood not only the politics. You see, that's the difference between, say, our friendship with Probir and Amit's friendship. With Amit's friendship, Amit and Probir shared an understanding of one of the modern scientific disciplines. With Amit, medicine; with Probir, science and technology. They shared that, and I think that kinship was hurtful, and that's the reason Prabir worked so hard to do this tribute book to Dr. Amit Sengupta. And again, it's a remarkable book because it catalogs and insufficiently, I should say, it's insufficient, but it catalogs the life of a remarkable person, Amit Sengupta, and it's done with a great deal of love, and so on. It's insufficient because, in a way, we were never able to force Dr. Amit Sengupta to do his book on Indian medicine. I mean, India has one of the most disturbing antisocial medical systems where out of pocket expenses is higher per capita than anywhere else in the world. And people just can't have access to good healthcare, even though, even though at the same time you have the very top medical care available for money, the very top, the very best pharmaceutical industry, the very best hospitals, right? The Apollos and so on, the very best care. But for the billion 0.2 of the population, you basically have nothing. And I really wish Amit had the time, was given the time from his movements and his commitments to put together an argument that might have included, the study that we did in Tricontinental on polyclinics in the Telugu-speaking region in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. The polyclinics that, very brave doctors, doctors like Amit Sen Gupta had produced. But unfortunately, Amit never got the time to put that together. And I would say, in anticipation of what we're going to talk about, Probir did, because his book Knowledge is Commons, in a way, is a summation of his understanding of science and technology.
I should also say that when we look at these books and when we look at the public facing work that people like Amit and Prabir have done, uh, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of the very very hard, continuous, everyday grunge work of organizing that they also did. They were not ivory tower intellectuals. They were not people who just gave, line. They were people who, they were boots on the ground, uh, type of people. And I also remember that Amit and others uh, also played an important role in framing the left view
Mm,
on parents, and the fairly progressive legislation that got passed under UPA 1 when the left had some influence on policy. The sort of invisible hand behind it, to a certain extent, was that of Amit and his comrades. And a lot of these type of interventions or contributions of people like Amit and Prabir are sometimes lost sight of, because the public facing work that they do is so much and so impressive. Uh, the next book, as you've already introduced, is this Knowledge is Commons, towards inclusive science and technology. And this is a book that we did in 2023. We did the first edition in August 2023, and it was reprinted after Probir went to jail in December 2023. Now, this is a book that I also, I mean, all the books I've worked on, but this is a book that I was very interested in, because it's a book that, in a sense, sort of summarizes a lifetime's thinking
mm,
on the issue of science and technology. And to my mind, again, like you, I have no understanding of these issues really. So for me, the two big things that struck me from this book, one was the very interesting discussion that Probir has on the relationship between science and technology, of how in the traditional Marxist frame, often it is seen as, science is the more sort of the slightly more elevated of the two disciplines. Technology is only applied science, and so therefore technology is somehow not quite at par with science. It's in a sense, a lesser art. Um, and Probir, of course, being an engineer himself, being deeply interested in how things work actually, the mechanics of things, but also deeply interested in how technology shapes the world and how technologies also have ideology that is embedded in them. Not just science,
mm,
but there's also ideology, philosophy, history, culture that is embedded in technologies. And this is something that he had a first-hand experience of, being a practicing engineer, but he also had a larger philosophical worldview that framed all of this. This was one part of the book that really fascinated me. The other is, Probir's ability to say something so pithy and so simple, and when you hear him say it or when you read him say it, you feel like, oh, this is the most obvious thing, right? And then you realize that, well, it's so obvious, yes, but it's not something that you thought of. And that's, of course, one of the framing ideas of this book, which is that uh, capitalists treat what are actually finite resources, such as minerals, oil, and so on and so forth, as if they're infinite, as if they can be exploited forever and ever and ever. There's no end to these, and they treat what is actually an infinite resource as if it is finite, and that is knowledge, by by fencing off knowledge with regimes of intellectual property, right?
mm,
And that is why this book is called Knowledge as Commons, harking back to the idea of the commons, which comes from, of course, agriculture, pastoralism, and so on and so forth. So this is a book, and I should say also that this is, in a sense, volume one
mm,
of uh, of a larger enterprise, and that's also something that we've spoken about. And as a side, sort of a little amusing idea, I should share with you that one of the covers that I had done for this book, Prabir laughed and he said, "I love this cover, but it's not the cover for this book. It's the cover for the next book that we're going to be doing." uh, which was going to be on the digital, uh, technologies and the idea of the digital commons and so on and so forth. But yes, this is a book uh, that we published right before his incarceration, and it really is, as I said, a kind of a summation of of a lifetime's engagement with these ideas, right? Um, I'll just quickly segue also to the last book that we'll be talking about, which is his memoirs, which we have published in two languages, English and Hindi, um, Keeping Up the Good Fight, Aage Aur Ladai Hai. Um, and and this is a book that unfortunately we were not able to bring out before he went to jail. We were working on it at that time, but within a few days of his arrest, we did bring out the book. And both these books, in a sense, are, of course, very different types of books, because one is about his life, and the other is about ideas.
mm.
But in a sense, they're also companion volumes, because they really sort of you know uh, they're the bookends, in a sense, of an entire life's engagement uh, with these ideas. um, could,
Yeah,
what do you
Sudhu, this conversation has been called the good citizen. Yeah. And I started by talking about how, Probir, um, the age of the Indian Republic, was born into a consensus about how India must create its own scientific and technological establishment. India must be self reliant. This was a key concept of the Indian Republic. In other words, the Indian Republic understood and believed that it was important to have self-reliance as the core position. Very interesting in Knowledge as Commons. Probi tells the story. It's called the untold story of the left in Indian science, and he tells the story in this book. It's not just about science and technology, but also the story of self-reliance, how India built self-reliance. And what I find interesting is in these two books, in a one sense, they are companion volumes, because in Keeping Up the Good Fight, there is an element of how those who were good citizens, who are good citizens, who are fighting for consensus views, secularism, self-reliance, rule of law, and so on, are being persecuted. I think this is very important. Is that what is, early in his career, Marx wrote an essay about the peasants who went into the forest to collect wood, and the government came and killed them for collecting wood. And Marx writes that the peasantry of Silesia, they knew the punishment, they were being killed, but they didn't know the crime. And in that sense, I think these two books of Probir are an indictment against the system, because in a way we know what the punishment is. Our friend, our author, our comrade, our brother Prabir Purkayastha is in jail. That's the punishment. Okay, he's an under trial. India has the world's largest under trials. I mean, by quantum number. No country comes close to the number of under trials. He's an under trial. He's just been charged after 6 months. And even that is not made public. He's got no trial yet. So we know the punishment. He is in jail. But what's the crime? What crime has he committed? He's committed the crime of secularism. That's in the constitution. He's committed the crime of self-reliance. That's the consensus view in India. I mean, from the 1940s, from the Bombay Plan and so on. Bombay Plan, written by the big industrialists. Forget the left, but he tells the story in Knowledge as Commons of the role of the left in arguing the case for self-reliance. What else? India being having its own science technology apparatus, including medicine, during the pandemic. How is that a crime? We know the punishment, we don't know the crime. And what these books establish, particularly keeping up the good fight, which I think everybody should read, every Indian citizen should read this book. Why? Because it establishes that punctually in India, the emergency now and so on, that people who are in fact within the consensus of the national story are being punished, but they haven't committed a crime. What's going on here? So that's why I think that for us, these are the two key books. This, in a way, is, as you say, part one, a summation of Probir's pre-digital writings. We're going to do a volume of his considerable work with the free software movement and so on. But this book is really about being a citizen, being the good citizen.
I should also add that, another area in which Prabir has done significant work, including litigation, public interest litigation, is in the area of telecoms, and and the telecom policy and regulating the telecom field, and the fact that the government should have control over it. Now, if this is not sovereignty, then what is, right? And that's also something that Prabir has been very active in, and some of the policy changes that have taken place, and some of the authorities that have been established or they've been given more power over the years, has come about because of advocacy and litigation, by people such as Prabir. So, so you're absolutely right in saying that we know what the punishment is, and you're right. He's an under trial, so he's not been. His crime has not even been stated actually, and certainly not been proved. But we all know that in India, the process is the punishment. Just this fact that he's been in jail for over 6 months now, the fact that Newsclick is unable to do its work, the fact that so many journalists and others are not able to hold jobs today, and so on. They've not been paid, etc. All of this
Mm.
forms part of the punishment that is being meted out to Probir. Um, I just want to sort of end this conversation about Probir's book, his work and his books that he's done with us, by also saying that Probir has also, apart from the books that he's done for Leftward, he's always been also a fantastic sounding board for us. Both, personally, you and I individually, personally, have learned a lot from Probir. We've bounced ideas off him. And very often we have learned completely new things from him, things about which we knew nothing. We've also been his friends. We've been the recipients of his enormous affection and generosity. Um, you know, uh, and at the same time, professionally as well, as Leftward Books, there's no doubt that from the day that Leftward came into being, Prabir Purkayastha has been one of our most important, unofficial, sort of unstated guides, in a sense. In a sense, our sort of extended editorial board. Um, he's been very much part of that, and there are many ideas that we have bounced off him, both for books, and on occasion we have also asked him to review books for us, or manuscripts that have come our way. We've asked him to look at it and give us his feedback on the books, especially where the areas were something that neither you nor I had any expertise in. So I just want to end this by expressing the hope that one that that the trial that the case comes to trial soon, fast, Secondly, that he gets a free and fair trial. Uh, and three, that we all know that he has committed no crime. And so, therefore, uh, on I'm sure that everyone at Leftward joins me in expressing the hope that Probir will be free very soon, and that hopefully soon we'll have the occasion to have a conversation with Probir uh, on the Leftward channel. Uh, any last words, Vijay?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that although you have gray hair and I don't, I want people to know that you and I are exactly the same age. So they shouldn't get there should be some no misunderstanding about that. Probir might be 20 years older than you and I, but he's always been a brother to us and still is a brother to us. I've never thought of him as from a different generation. You know, he has an incredible democratic spirit. And I just want to emphasize that when Sudhu says that we go to him for advice and so on, this is not some guru shishya thing. He has always treated us with respect, and we've always benefited from his democratic spirit. Um, that's the good citizen. The good citizen is not somebody who demands obedience. A good citizen is somebody who teaches other citizens out of love and affection. And that love and affection is what I think we want to send to our brother Probir from this discussion that we have had, a discussion which has given me a great emotional sense of the immense work we've done together here, just with Leftward, but of course with other projects, millions and millions of projects. So, salute to Probir. One day you might watch this hour-long discussion between Sudhu and me and say, man, these guys got it all wrong. They talked all kinds of nonsense about science. Laugh with us, Probir. Laugh with us.
All right. With this, a big thanks to everyone who joined. I hope you'll use your social media presence, WhatsApp, etc., to spread this conversation amongst your friends and comrades. And most of all, Vijay and I hope everyone at Leftward hopes that you will read Probir, because he is one of the most compelling writers and intellectuals and activists of our time. Thank you very much.